It was just another night on the road for Jake, an old trucker with more miles on him than the tires on his rig. He had just finished his latest haul and was heading home after a storm that hit out of nowhere, dumping sheets of rain down in buckets. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, but the roads were slick and treacherous. He gripped the steering wheel of his big rig, the hum of the engine keeping him company as the road stretched out ahead of him. Jake wasn't a man who easily worried. He'd driven in worse conditions than this, in snowstorms and tornadoes. But something about tonight felt off. Maybe it was the storm that still lingered in the air, or maybe it was the road itself that seemed darker than usual, like it was trying to hide something. He didn't know, but he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickle as he drove through the mist that clung to the pavement. As the truck rumbled down the highway, Jake noticed something strange. The road ahead looked different. The asphalt, usually a dull grey, had a glossy sheen to it, almost like oil. It glistened, reflecting his headlights, but there was something more to it, something that made his stomach churn. He leaned forward in his seat, squinting through the windshield as he tried to make sense of it. That's when he saw it. The road wasn't just slick, it was covered in a deep, dark red liquid. It wasn't water, it wasn't oil, it was blood. Fresh blood still glistening in the headlights, pooling in puddles along the side of the road. Jake's foot instinctively pressed down on the brake, slowing the truck as his mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. "Goddamn," he muttered to himself. What the hell happened here? He couldn't figure it out. The blood stretched on for miles and there was no sign of an accident. No wreckage, no bodies, just this strange crimson trail that seemed to beckon him forward. Something didn't sit right. He checked his rearview mirror. The rain had stopped, but the road behind him was empty. No cars, no other trucks. He was completely alone out here, just him and this eerie, blood-covered highway. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to get the hell out of there. But curiosity won out. Jake wasn't the kind to turn tail and run. He decided to press on, convinced he'd find the source of this blood spill. But as he continued driving, the blood didn't stop. It was as if the road was made of it. The puddles grew larger, the blood thicker, and soon it was impossible to avoid driving through it. The tires of his rig slid slightly as they made contact with the slick surface, the sound of rubber screeching as the truck tried to maintain traction. His grip tightened on the wheel. "I've seen some weird stuff in my day. But this—" Jake muttered, shaking his head. The blood was getting to him. The air around him felt thick and stifling, like something was lurking just beyond his vision. The headlights cut through the dark mist, but the road ahead still felt endless, like it was stretching into some void. As he pressed on, he tried to ignore the unease creeping over him, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of the truck as it barreled forward. Then, out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. A sign. It was a small, worn sign, half obscured by the mist and barely visible through the storm's aftermath. The lettering on it was faded, but Jake could make out enough to see it was the name of a town. "Welcome to Red Hollow." Jake frowned. He didn't remember any towns by that name, not in this part of the country. He hadn't heard of it in years of driving these roads. The name sounded wrong, like it belonged in a ghost story. And that uneasy feeling inside him grew stronger as he realized there was no other sign of life for miles. The blood-covered road continued to wind toward the town, and for reasons Jake couldn't explain, he found himself heading toward it, pulled by some force he didn't understand. Jake's heart raced as the door slammed shut behind him, with a force that rattled the windows. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to freeze. His eyes flicked from the door to the photos in his hand, then back to the door again. The dim light in the diner flickered once more, casting eerie shadows that danced across the worn floorboards. He swallowed hard and turned toward the door, taking a hesitant step forward. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he could feel the blood-slick road beneath his boots. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his gut, like a sinking weight that was dragging him down. The door was locked. There was no way out. Jake's pulse hammered in his chest, and he fought to steady his breathing. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, thinner, creeping toward him like dark fingers. For a moment he thought he heard something, a faint whisper, carried by the wind maybe. No, it wasn't the wind. It was something else. He tried the handle again, twisting it with force, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at his chest. He turned back to the room, to the photograph still lying on the counter. His hand reached out, trembling, and picked up another photo. The people in this one were different. A new set of faces, some of them looking just as young, some with smiles stretched across their faces like they knew something Jake didn't. Their eyes were too bright, too wide. The blood-red tint lingered at the edges, like a stain that had soaked through time itself. The back of the photo was the same as the first one. Red Hollow, 1938. It was almost as if this place had been frozen in time, a moment in history that refused to die. Jake's fingers gripped the photo tighter as his mind raced. He turned back toward the door. Bang! The sound rang through the room like thunder. Something heavy had struck the door. No, not the door, but something right behind. It! His heart leapt into his throat. The sound was hollow, like it came from somewhere deeper than the room itself, from somewhere in the ground. The fog outside the diner pressed against the windows, swirling like some monstrous beast was lurking just out of sight. The streetlights outside flickered, casting long, erratic shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Jake stumbled back from the door, instinctively clutching the photo to his chest. His mind was racing now, all logic thrown out the window. Something unnatural was happening in Red Hollow, and he was caught right in the middle of it. He needed answers. Fast. Without thinking, he shoved the photograph back into his jacket pocket and turned toward the diner's counter. There had to be something, anything, that could help him figure out what the hell was going on here. His eyes scanned the shelves behind the counter, half expecting to find bottles of whiskey or stale food, but nothing looked normal. Everything in the diner was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been abandoned for decades, except for one thing. At the far end of the counter, hidden in the shadows, was a small rusted bell. The kind of bell you'd ring to get the attention of a diner waitress. Jake felt a sudden compulsion to reach for it, as if something in the room was calling him to do so. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment his fingers made contact, the bell let out a soft, almost imperceptible ding. Nothing happened. Jake waited a beat, unsure of what to expect. The bell's sound echoed through the empty room, then silence. For a long moment, he stood there, frozen before he turned back toward the door. It was still locked. The windows were still fogged up. The road outside, still slick with blood. And then it happened. A soft whisper, like a breath against the back of his neck, sent a shiver through his spine. Jake spun around, his heart thudding in his chest. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was a woman. She was dressed in a faded white dress, her face obscured by a veil. Her posture was unnaturally still, and she didn't move, didn't even blink. The shadows seemed to cling to her like a second skin, almost as if she was part of the fog outside. But what chilled Jake to his core wasn't the fact that she was there, but the expression or lack thereof on her face. Her eyes were hollow, empty, like she was staring right through him. The bell in Jake's hand began to ring again, louder this time, almost as if it was calling to the woman. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He felt paralyzed, unable to move or even breathe properly. The air was heavy, suffocating, and for the briefest moment Jake thought he could hear the faintest sound. Something small, almost like a baby crying. The sound was distant at first, but then it grew louder, echoing through the diner, shaking the walls around him. The woman tilted her head slightly as if listening to the sound as well. And then, with a voice so soft it was barely audible, she whispered, "It's waiting for you." Jake's blood ran cold. His eyes darted to the door, to the windows, to the thick fog that had swallowed the town. "Waiting for you." Before he could react, the woman took a slow step forward, the floorboards creaking under her weight. Jake backed up instinctively, his heart pounding louder with each step. He could hear her footsteps in sync with his own, each one dragging through the dust, each one drawing her closer. Her lips barely moved as she spoke again. "Come find me, before it's too late." The whisper barely registered before the bell rang again, this time with a deafening clang. The sound filled the room, and for a split second, everything went still. The woman stopped moving, her vacant eyes staring directly into his, and then just like that she disappeared. Jake stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The room felt colder now, the silence deafening. He glanced at the door once again. It was still locked. He thought about the woman's words. "It's waiting for you." Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something terrible. He had to get out of this town fast. But as he made his way to the door again, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if he wasn't meant to leave? Jake's pulse hammered in his chest, and the feeling of dread tightened its grip around him like a vice. The air inside the diner felt suffocating, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. He tried the door again, desperate to break free, but it still wouldn't budge. The lock was immovable. His stomach churned. What was happening here? Why couldn't he leave? He turned to look out the window, his hands trembling as he wiped away the fogged glass. The street outside was still covered in that strange, slick substance, the same blood-red slickness that had coated the road he'd driven down. His mind raced. He wasn't sure what he was more afraid of, the empty town outside, the woman with the empty eyes, or the terrible feeling of being trapped. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the diner. Jake flinched, his eyes snapping to the door. Someone was knocking. He hesitated for a second, wondering if it was the woman, or worse, someone else, something else. But something deep in his gut told him he had no choice. He couldn't stay in here forever. Jake cautiously approached the door, his hand hovering over the knob. It was as if the diner had become an extension of the fog outside, frozen, unyielding. He gripped the handle and gave it a tug. It didn't budge. He braced himself, then slammed his shoulder into the door, his muscles burning with the effort. The door creaked open, just enough for him to see outside. A figure was standing there. The figure was draped in shadows, its form too indistinct, too blurry for him to make out. The streetlights flickered dimly in the fog, their weak light barely cutting through the thick mist that hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Jake thought he saw a flicker of movement in the shadows, something or someone creeping along the edge of the road. His heart skipped. "Who's there?" Jake called, his voice hoarse and weak. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "It's waiting for you." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Jake recoiled, the hairs on his neck standing on end. He was suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was in that diner, trapped behind the door that wouldn't open. Then, the figure stepped fully into the light. It was a man. Or, at least, it had the shape of one, tall, slender, and draped in what appeared to be tattered clothes. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something about the way he stood, frozen, unblinking, that made Jake's blood run cold. The man spoke, his voice low and distorted, almost a whisper that didn't seem to belong to a human. "The road has chosen you." Jake's heart stopped in his chest. The man's eyes, Jake couldn't see them, but he could feel them. They were cold, hollow, and they bored into him with an intensity that chilled him to his very core. "The town calls you." Jake's hand instinctively reached for the door again, but the man reached forward and grasped it with unnerving speed. Jake's fingers froze against the metal. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" Jake managed to rasp, his voice trembling. Figure's hand tightened on the door, and for the first time, Jake could see something in his eyes, a flicker of malevolence. "You can't leave now, Jake. No one leaves Red Hollow." The words felt like a death sentence. His throat went dry. There was no escaping. He wasn't just stuck in the diner. He was stuck in this town, trapped by something ancient, something malicious. Without warning, the man stepped back into the fog, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. Jake stood there, gasping for air, his mind spinning, his body trembling. There was only one thing Jake knew for sure now. He wasn't alone. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows. The shadows in the diner grew longer, as if they were trying to pull Jake in, to swallow him whole. The oppressive silence of the place seemed to stretch on forever, making his skin crawl. The bell behind the counter rang again, breaking the stillness. Jake whipped around to face the sound, his eyes wide, searching for the source. There was nothing, no one standing there. Just the bell, softly ringing. its clanging now a harsh reminder of how hopelessly trapped he was. He thought of the strange man's words again. "The road has chosen you." What did that mean? How had the town chosen him, and why couldn't he leave? The diner was like a cage, each minute dragging him deeper into its suffocating grasp. A sudden thought struck Jake. What if there was someone else who could help him? Someone who might know what had happened to the town and how to break the curse that seemed to hang over it. Maybe there was someone who could tell him what the hell was going on. He dashed for the back door of the diner. It was his only chance to escape. But just as he reached the door, the faintest sound reached his ears. Something soft, almost like the sound of footsteps. But it wasn't footsteps. It was a child's cry, faint and echoing in the distance. Jake froze. The cry. It sounded familiar. He knew he had heard it before. His heart beat faster, the baby's cry. He turned toward the door, the familiar sense of dread creeping up his spine. He had to get out of here. He had to find out where the cry was coming from. But as he reached for the door handle, he paused. The woman's voice echoed in his mind. "Come find me before it's too late." He didn't know if he could trust the voice or what it meant, but something told him that the answers, the truth about Red Hollow, were waiting for him. He had no choice but to follow. Jake's hand hovered over the door handle, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite grasp. The cry of the baby still echoed in his head, pulling him, luring him towards something he couldn't explain. The air around him grew thick, heavy, with the weight of his choices. He could stay in the diner, locked in, as if pretending nothing was wrong, or he could go out there, find the source of the cry, and perhaps unravel whatever dark mystery had taken root in Red Hollow. There was no going back now. Jake pushed the door open and stepped into the night, the cool air hitting his face like a slap. He instinctively pulled his jacket tighter around him, but the chill in the air wasn't what made him shiver. It was the silence, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, the kind where you're hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, but nothing ever feels quite right. He took a few steps out onto the blood-slick road, his boots making a squelching sound as they sank into the strange, slick substance. His headlights carved out small pockets of visibility in the fog, but it never felt like enough. There was always just too much darkness, too much emptiness surrounding him. And then the cry came again. This time it was closer. It was sharp, desperate, almost as if the child were in pain, pleading for help. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He followed the sound, moving deeper into the fog. The air felt heavier with each step, like the atmosphere itself was pressing in on him, trying to make him stop. He stumbled, his foot slipping on the slick ground, but he pushed on. The road stretched on endlessly. It was as if it led nowhere, just more of that eerie fog and that unnatural substance, making it feel like he was walking in a dream, or worse, a nightmare. The further he went, the more distorted the world around him became. The streetlights flickered and buzzed. The buildings, their outlines barely visible, looked as though they were about to fall apart at any moment. Another cry. This one was louder, almost as if it was right in front of him. "Where are you?" Jake muttered under his breath, his voice barely carrying over the wind. He wanted to call out, but the cry of the child felt like a secret, like it was meant to stay hidden. Suddenly he saw a figure in the distance, standing at the edge of the road. At first, it was just a shadow, a human shape, barely visible through the fog. But then it took a step forward, and Jake could make out the shape more clearly, a woman standing alone in the middle of the road. Her features were blurry, distorted, like she was caught between worlds. She wore a long, tattered coat, and her hair hung in wild tangles over her face. "Hey," Jake shouted, his voice rough from the fog. "Do you know what's going on here? Do you know what's happening to this place?" The woman didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head to one side as though considering him for a moment. Then, she stepped back, pointing toward the town. "Follow the road," she said, her voice barely a whisper, like it was being carried away by the wind. "It's waiting for you." Jake's blood ran cold. The way she spoke, as if she knew him, as if she knew what he was supposed to do next, was more than unsettling. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice trembling with both fear and frustration. The woman didn't answer. She only stepped back into the fog, disappearing from view as though she were never there at all. A breath caught in Jake's throat. He had to follow. He had no idea why, but something inside him was pulling him forward, urging him to take another step. The crying had grown louder, now echoing from somewhere deep within the fog, somewhere beyond what he could see. The sound seemed to reverberate through his bones, and then it stopped. Suddenly, dead silence. Jake froze in place, the quiet now more suffocating than any noise. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, a deep, primal fear crawling over him. The feeling of being watched crept over him, thick and suffocating. His foot moved before he could stop it, another step deeper into the fog. As he did, the air grew colder. The blood-slick road beneath him felt more viscous, like it was alive and it was trying to pull him in. And then, without warning, the fog parted. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he found himself standing in front of a large, decaying building, an old church, or what used to be a church. Its windows were shattered, the roof caved in, and the walls were blackened, as though they had been burned. The air reeked of death. The cries of the baby returned, louder now, filling the silence, rising from inside the building. The sound was agonizing, as though the child was being tortured. "No!" Jake shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the fog. He stepped forward, his hands shaking as he reached for the crumbling doors. But the doors didn't open. A whisper filled his ears, a voice he recognized as the woman's. "It's too late, Jake. You shouldn't have come." His heart raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had to get in. He had to stop whatever was happening. He didn't understand, but the urgency was consuming him. His hands slammed against the doors again, harder this time, but they remained, solid, unyielding. Then he heard it, a deep, guttural growl. Jake's eyes snapped to the darkness behind him. Through the thick fog, he saw them, shadows, figures moving, shifting, crawling toward him like a tidal wave of terror, and in the center of the darkness, the glowing red eyes of something larger, something that had been waiting for him. Jake's heart raced. The shadows creeping toward him were unlike anything he'd seen before, like they were alive, crawling with malicious intent. The red eyes in the dark seemed to be locked onto him, their gaze like a burning brand on his. "Soul?" He tried to back away, but the fog closed in around him, thick and suffocating. The air seemed to constrict, and the ground beneath him felt like it was shifting, tilting. Every step he took, the road seemed to grow more treacherous, the blood-slick substance making it harder to move. He could feel the cold dread creeping through his veins, paralyzing him, making his limbs heavy. Then the growl came again, louder this time. It was deep and rumbling, almost as if the earth itself was speaking. Jake turned to look, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The figure in the distance was getting closer, taller, darker, and more grotesque. At first it looked like a man, but the shape wasn't right. The shoulders were too broad, the legs too long, and the way it moved was wrong, too smooth, too fluid, like it wasn't quite human. "Get back," Jake muttered to himself, taking a few unsteady steps backward. But the creature didn't stop. It just kept moving, its presence growing like an overwhelming storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. Jake spun around again, desperately trying to find a way out. He could hear the baby's cries now, louder than ever, coming from inside the decaying church. But there was something else in the sound, a whisper that mixed with the wail, something indistinguishable, haunting. He knew the creature wasn't the only thing coming for him. The whispers, the cries, they were all connected to that horrible, rotten building. It was as if the entire town was alive, alive with something old, something ancient that wanted him to stay. The creature was closer now. He could see the ragged outline of its face, something that wasn't quite human but was unmistakably monstrous. The red eyes were burning, searing through the darkness like two coals in the night. Its lips pulled back into a jagged smile, and Jake could see sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. Jake was backed into a corner now, the crumbling church on one side and the unearthly creature on the other. His breath came in ragged gasps, panic threatening to overtake him. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to run, but his legs felt paralyzed, like they were cemented into the blood-soaked road. Suddenly, the growl changed, morphing into a laugh, a low guttural chuckle that seemed to echo off the broken buildings, reverberating in his chest. The laughter was unnatural, like it came from somewhere beyond the mortal realm. Jake's skin crawled as the laughter grew louder, more insistent. "You don't understand, do you?" The voice was deep and gravelly, emerging from the shadows, slithering into his mind. "You're part of it now. You came for the child, but the child was never the real prize." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" His voice trembled, barely audible over the rising cacophony. "You're the next sacrifice," the voice growled. "The child was only the bait. You were meant to find it, meant to come here. You, Jake, are the key." Jake's mind was reeling. The words felt like an iron weight dropping on his chest. The laughter echoed again, cruel and relentless. But now, there was something else. The air seemed to buzz like a low hum just beneath the surface, like the town itself was alive. "No," Jake muttered, backing up against the church doors, desperate for an escape. His hands clawed at the old wood, but they wouldn't budge. "Too late," the voice whispered. "Too late for you." The creature took another step forward, its glowing eyes locking onto Jake with a predatory gleam. But just as it moved in for the final strike, the air changed again. The baby's cry stopped, dead silence, and then from behind him Jake heard the creak of the church door. A figure emerged from the shadows behind him, a woman with wild hair and a white dress that billowed, as if caught by an invisible wind. She didn't look at Jake. Her gaze was locked onto the creature. "Leave him be," she said, her voice steady, commanding. The creature hesitated, its eyes narrowing in confusion. "I'm not part of your game," she continued, her hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Not this time." The creature snarled, a primal sound that rattled the bones, but it didn't move closer. Instead, it stopped glaring at the woman with malevolent fury. For a long moment, the two stood like that, frozen in some kind of silent standoff. And then, with a final guttural growl, the creature disappeared into the fog, its form fading into nothingness. Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath shallow. The woman turned to him, her expression soft but resolute. "You have to leave," she said quietly, "before it starts again." Jake could barely comprehend her words. He was still shaking, still trying to process everything that had just happened. He looked back toward the town, toward the road, and it all felt like a dream, a nightmare. Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm the one who's been here too long," she answered. "I was like you once, trapped looking for a way out. But this town doesn't let you leave once it's caught you." She turned away, taking a step toward the church. "Go, before it finds you again." Jake swallowed hard, unsure of what to do. The fog was beginning to lift, and in the distance he could make out the faint outlines of the highway. The truck, the road home, but something held him back. Some part of him knew with every fiber of his being, that leaving wasn't the end. It never was. But maybe, just maybe, he could outrun whatever waited for him on the blood-slick road. With a heavy heart and one last look at the crumbling town, Jake turned away, the echoes of the child's cry and the woman's warning lingering in his mind. He stepped onto the road, into the fog, and began to walk. And as he walked, the town faded. Behind him, swallowed whole by the darkness. It was one of those nights, you know, the kind where the road stretches out in front of you like an endless black ribbon, the highway lights flickering at the edges of your vision. For most truckers, it's just another shift, another load, another night of that quiet solitude you get when you're rolling down some stretch of highway that nobody really knows about. I was one of those truckers. My rig, an old Freightliner, hummed along the asphalt as I steered it across Route 17, headed from Texas to Oklahoma. I'd been driving for a good few hours, the moon hanging high and full in the sky, barely a cloud, to block it out. It wasn't too late, just past 9 p.m., but the road felt empty. I hadn't seen another soul for miles, just the occasional truck passing by, their headlights making it look like ghosts in the distance. That's when I noticed the car. It wasn't much at first, just a set of headlights appearing out of the Darker coming up behind me. Maybe another trucker. That's what I thought anyway, but the car didn't seem to pass me. It stayed just behind my rig, pacing me. You know how sometimes you can feel eyes on you? It was like that. I glanced in my mirrors. Nothing. Just headlights. No tailgating. Just an eerie quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. It felt off. I flicked the CB radio on. "Breaker 19, anyone out there? What's the word on the road ahead?" I said, trying to break the silence. Static. Then, finally, a voice came through, distorted. "Yeah, trucker. No one out here but you. Stay. Safe?" I was about to reply when I noticed the car pulling up alongside me. "Okay, now what?" I muttered under my breath, squinting into the dark to try and make sense of the silhouette in my peripheral vision. At first, it seemed like the car was just there, keeping pace with me. I figured maybe they wanted to chat or just weren't in a rush, but then I saw the figure in the passenger seat. It was a person, or at least I thought it was, dressed in a dark hoodie, just staring ahead, not moving, not shifting. Nothing. It was creepy as hell, but not enough to send me off the road. I figured it was just some hitchhiker who had found themselves a ride, and I'd get rid of them at the next truck stop. The car pulled up alongside me, and I could hear the engine humming gently, just keeping the rhythm with my truck's roar. I gave a little wave out the window, half expecting the person to wave back, maybe even give me a thumbs up, but nothing. We rode side by side for a minute, maybe two. The person didn't move at all. Then, as if on cue, the car sped up and pulled ahead of me. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I swear that passenger's eyes, there was something strange about them. Dark, almost too dark, like there was no light in them at all. I shook my head, telling myself I was just overtired, but the unease stuck with me. I didn't know why, but something about the whole thing felt wrong. That's when it happened. The car slowed, just enough for me to pull up beside it again. It didn't even take more than a second for me to see what was happening. The passenger, the one who hadn't moved a muscle this whole time, now turned his head, and he looked at me. I don't know why it sent a chill straight down my spine, but it did. It was a smile, a slow, deliberate smile, like he was savoring something. His teeth, yellow and uneven, gleamed under the moonlight. I looked away fast, focusing on the road ahead. My hands tightened on the wheel, and then, out of nowhere, the car swerved in front of me, pulling into the breakdown lane, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. I had to hit the brakes hard to avoid slamming into it. The car came to a stop. For a moment I hesitated, unsure what to do. Then the passenger door of the car swung open. "Need a ride?" A voice called from the dark. I froze. It was him. The same guy standing now by the open door, his grin never wavering. "Sorry, pal," I muttered, my foot already on the gas. "I'm good." I was about to pull away when I heard him call out again. "You don't want to leave me behind," he said, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. I slammed the gas pedal and my truck roared to life as I tore down the road. It wasn't much longer before I found a truck stop, the kind with the neon signs and the greasy diner attached. I parked my rig by the far side, away from the rest of the trucks. I needed to stretch my legs, clear my head. That whole situation had freaked me out more than I cared to admit. I pushed open the door to the diner, and the bell jingled as I stepped inside. The place was quiet. Just a couple of folks hunched over coffee cups at the counter. The waitress gave me a look as I walked past, her eyes taking in the disheveled look I must have had. I sat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and tried to shake off the nerves. It wasn't until about halfway through my cup that I heard the bell jingle again. I didn't need to look up. I already knew who it was. The same guy, the one from the car. He walked in, slow and deliberate, that same grin on his face. He scanned the room like he was looking for someone. I didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't even blink. He was heading my way, his boots making soft taps on the linoleum. "You're still awake," he said, settling on the stool next to me. I didn't respond. He didn't need me to. "I've been following you for a while now," he said, leaning in close, his breath smelling like old smoke. "You've been doing some things, haven't you?" I finally turned to look at him, and I saw that those eyes, those black, empty eyes, were fixed on me. "How do you know that?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. He just smiled, that sickening grin spreading wider. "Know everything," he said. "I know what you've done, where you've been, and most importantly, I know where you're going." I felt my pulse quicken, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "No, you don't," I replied, my voice shaking now. "I don't know you," he laughed. It wasn't a real laugh, more like the kind you'd hear from someone who wasn't. Quite human. "Oh, but you do," he said, his hand sliding across the counter, his fingers brushing against mine. I jerked my hand back, but he only leaned in closer. "You know me better than anyone. You've always known me, always will." I was about to stand up, but his hand shot out, holding me in place with a grip so cold it made my skin crawl. "You're not going anywhere, my friend," he said. "Not yet. Not until I've had my fill." That's when I realized the man sitting next to me wasn't just a man at all. The truck's engine roared to life, but it felt like I was driving through fog, not just on the road, but in my head. I'd been hauling freight for over a decade, but tonight felt different. It wasn't just the unsettling silence. Between me and the stranger I'd picked up, it was something else, something crawling in the back of my skull. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of him, the passenger. I could barely make out his features, his face half shadowed by the dim cabin light, but something about him unsettled me. His eyes were too dark, too empty. He wasn't looking at the road, just staring out into the night, his hands resting casually in his lap. But there was something about his stillness that didn't feel right. My palms were sweating on the wheel. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off. It was late. I'd been on the road too long. Maybe I was just tired. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and straight, the headlights cutting through the thick darkness. "So," I said, my voice a little too loud in the stillness. "Where you headed?" He turned his head slightly, enough to make eye contact, and I swear it felt like he was looking right through me. It was a chilling, unsettling stare, like he knew everything about me, like he could see into my soul. "Does it matter?" He replied, his voice smooth and calm, but it had that strange edge to it, that hint of something not quite human. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I shifted in my seat again, swallowing hard. "Well," I forced out, "I'm headed north, long haul, you know. Might be a couple more hours before I get to a rest stop if you want to stretch your legs." He didn't respond for a long time, and just as I was about to ask again, he spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "You're running." I froze, my foot still on the gas. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice thick. "You're running," he repeated, his eyes fixed. "On the road ahead. From something. From someone." My stomach sank and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I wasn't about to let some stranger get inside my head, but somehow what he said hit too close to home and I couldn't ignore it. "Look, I don't know who you think I am, but—" "No," he interrupted, his voice sharp now, cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm not talking about who you think you are. I'm talking about who you really are." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to engage with him. I really didn't. But something about the way he said it, like he was talking to me and not just at me, stirred something in the pit of my stomach. Something that felt all too familiar, a long-buried itch I hadn't scratched in years. "I don't know what you're getting at," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "But this is a one-way trip. You've got your ride. Now just sit back, all right?" His lips curled into that twisted smile again, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Sure, trucker. I'll sit back. But you can't hide from me. You can't outrun what's in your past." I was suddenly aware of how dry my mouth had become, how my throat was closing up. I glanced at him again in the rear view, trying to shake off the feeling that something had changed between us. The truck seemed to hum louder, and the air inside the cab felt thick, like it was pressing against me. "You think you're the only one who's been running?" he continued, his voice so soft now, almost too calm. "You've been running for a long time, haven't you?" I could feel my chest tighten, that heavy feeling I'd been trying to outrun creeping in. My thoughts were all over the place now, tumbling through memories I didn't want to revisit, things I had buried deep down, things I thought I'd left behind on another stretch of road, in another time. My grip on the wheel tightened, my knuckles white. I couldn't let this guy get to me, I couldn't. "You don't know a damn thing about me," I snapped, hoping the anger would give me control again, but his eyes never left me. I could feel his gaze pressing into the side of my face, like a hand on my shoulder, heavy and unyielding. "I know everything," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I know what you did, and I know why you've been running." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, my pulse quickening as the words sunk in. My past. I couldn't stop myself from going there, couldn't stop the flood of memories rushing forward, memories I'd spent so many years trying to forget. It was the old stuff, the bad decisions, the stuff that haunted me every time I looked in the mirror. The shit I'd done. Things I tried to bury under the hum of the truck's engine, under the endless miles. I'd been in trouble a few times, sure, drunk driving, fights, the whole mess. But then there was that one night, the one I could never escape, the one that changed everything. I wasn't proud of it. It was one of those moments where you can't look back because if you do, you might just break. I killed a man, not in the way you might think, not in a fight or a shootout, but in a way that was just as bad. A stupid accident, a moment of rage. It was a mistake, but mistakes like that follow you. They never let you go. And since that night I'd been running from the guilt, from the fear, from the very thing that I knew would come back to claim me one day. The passenger was still watching me, a quiet smile playing on his lips, as if he knew exactly where my mind had gone. "I was there," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "I saw what you did." I slammed my foot on the brake, the truck jolting forward as I fought to keep control. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could keep control anymore. I could feel the weight of it all crashing down on me, the memories, the regret, the fear of what I knew was coming. He leaned in closer, his voice low and smooth. "You can't outrun this, trucker. You can't outrun the things you've done. Not forever." I could feel my chest tightening, my vision blurring. The truck had slowed to a crawl now, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, ragged and uneven. I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to acknowledge the truth in his words, but I couldn't help it. "You're just a passenger." I spat, my voice shaking. "That's all you are, just another ghost on the road." He smiled wider, the darkness in his eyes deepening. "Am I? Or is it you who's been haunting yourself all this time?" I felt the world around me start to tilt, the weight of my past threatening to swallow me whole. The truck rumbled, and I gripped the wheel harder, trying to stay grounded, but I could feel the grip of my past tightening around my throat, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it wasn't going anywhere, and deep down I knew it. The past was never far behind. The truck was eating up the miles, but the road felt different. It had been hours since the diner, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something deep inside me. The night was thick with fog, the kind that rolled over, the road like a living thing, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I squinted through the windshield, the headlights cutting through the gray like weak candles in the dark. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, but even that didn't calm the unease twisting in my gut. The passenger sat there like he had since I picked him up, staring out the window. He hadn't said much since our conversation at the diner, but I could feel his eyes on me. Not in the way a normal passenger might look, just a casual glance. No, this was different. It was like he was watching me, studying me, waiting for me to crack. I tried to shake it off, focus on the road. But the silence in the truck was unbearable. I glanced at him in the mirror. His eyes were fixed ahead, but it was his smile that gave me pause. It wasn't a smile, it was something else, something sinister. The kind of smile you give a man right before you take everything from him. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to break the tension. But my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of the engine. Then he spoke. "Oh, it's just perfect." His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it like the calm before a storm. "You're doing just fine." I felt my stomach twist. There was something in his tone, something that wasn't right. I didn't say anything, just focused on the road ahead, but I could feel his eyes on me again, boring into the back of my skull. I had to stop. My mind was spiraling. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, and I'd been pushing myself harder than I should have. Maybe I just needed a break, a coffee, a chance to breathe and clear my head. I spotted a small rest stop up ahead, barely visible through the fog, the neon lights casting a dull glow on the asphalt. I didn't even think twice. I slowed down, pulling into the lot. The truck stopped. With a rough jolt, and I cut the engine. I swung the door open, the cold night air rushing in like a slap to the face. The fog smelled strange, like wet earth and something more, something rotten. I didn't want to think about it. I stepped out of the truck, stretching my stiff legs. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked over to the vending machine. I needed something to wake me up, something to clear the haze in my brain. I tried not to look back at the truck. I didn't want to think about the passenger waiting inside, but I could feel him. As I fumbled for change, I heard a voice from behind. "Me, you're looking for something, aren't you?" I froze. The voice was soft, just loud enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing by the truck. The passenger. How the hell had he gotten out without me hearing the door open? "You're always looking for something," he said, his grin wider now, stretching from ear to ear. "A way out, a way forward, something to fix what's broken." I felt my blood run cold. "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped, taking a step back. He didn't move, just stood there watching me with those dark, soulless eyes. "I know what you've done," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know the things you've tried to bury, the mistakes, the things you've run from." My heart was pounding. Now. It felt like the ground was tilting beneath me. I looked around. There was no one else, just me and this guy standing in the parking lot. The vending machine buzzed behind me, the only sound in the stillness. "You've been running for so long, haven't you?" the passenger continued. "But there's no running from me, not anymore. You think you've escaped the past, but I'm always right behind you." I didn't know what to say. My mind was reeling. Who the hell was this guy? Who are you? I finally managed to choke out. He tilted his head, that grin never leaving his face. "I'm just a friend," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "A friend who's been following you for a long time." Something in my chest twisted. My breath was coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "I don't know what you want, but you've got the wrong guy." I was trying to hold on to some sense of control, but the world around me felt like it was crumbling. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. They made sense in a way I didn't want to understand. "You can't outrun yourself," he said softly. "You can't escape the things you've done. Not now. Not ever." I spun around, walking quickly toward the truck. I needed to get away. From him, needed to get back on the road, to just move. But when I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, he was already there, sitting next to me. I stiffened, my heart thudding in my chest. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice so close to my ear that I could feel the coldness of it seeping into my skin. "Not until we finish this." I slammed the door shut and tried to start the engine. The truck rumbled to life, but the air inside the cab felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The passenger sat there, still smiling, that terrible smile. His eyes didn't leave mine. "You're mine now," he said softly. "And this is where it all ends." I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing out of the lot. The truck shot forward, the tires screeching, but it wasn't enough to outrun the feeling closing in on me, that suffocating sense that I was no longer in control. The fog rolled in even thicker now, the world outside the truck blending into an impenetrable wall of gray. "You can't run from the past, trucker," the passenger said, his voice low and full of promise. "The road always leads you back to where it began." I gritted my teeth, slamming the wheel hard to the left, trying to break free from the grip of his words, his presence. But the road kept curving, twisting, stretching out into the unknown. The descent had begun. I couldn't breathe. The truck shuddered beneath me as if it were alive, groaning under some unseen weight. My fingers were stiff, clenching the steering wheel with a vice-like grip. The road stretched out ahead, but it was like the asphalt was shifting beneath my wheels. Every time I tried to focus on the horizon, the road blurred, folding in on itself. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, and the eerie hum of the engine filled the cabin like a drone, making everything feel even more suffocating. I glanced into the rearview mirror. He was still there. The passenger. I couldn't see his face, just the outline of his figure sitting in the shadows. But I could feel him, like his presence was crawling under my skin, gnawing at my insides. Every inch of me was on edge, every nerve firing with that primal sense of danger. I could hear his voice echoing in my mind, and it wasn't just his voice anymore, it was everywhere. It was the sound of my own thoughts, twisted and distorted, a constant hum beneath everything else. "You can't run, trucker." His voice was smooth, almost too calm, but it sent a chill through my bones. "I'm not running," I muttered, my hands shaking as I tried to steady the wheel. But I wasn't in control anymore. It wasn't just the road that was twisting. My very perception of reality was starting to unravel. The truck seemed to sway, veering off course on its own, like it was being pulled in a direction I didn't want to go. My foot slammed the brake, but it did nothing. The world outside the window twisted into something unnatural, a nightmare stretched into the real world. The road ahead seemed to split into endless paths, all leading to nowhere. I swerved, pulling the rig back onto the straight lane. But the lane wasn't straight anymore. It was like a river curling and bending with every curve, constantly slipping away from my control. I slammed the horn, but there was no sound. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the air itself was thickening around me. The engine sputtered. The truck, it was losing power. "No, no, no," I hissed, my hands jerking the wheel in desperation. But nothing I did mattered. The truck was already gone. Suddenly the entire rig pitched forward. I felt the world tilt, gravity pressing against me with an unnatural force. My body was pinned against the seat as the truck's front end dipped, as if some invisible hand had grabbed hold of it and yanked it into the darkness. My stomach flipped, and for a moment I thought I was going to die right there, trapped in the belly of the rig. The passenger seat, empty. I looked. I don't know why, but I looked, and there he was, the demon. But not just in the seat. He was standing now, looming over me, his long, twisted form stretching unnaturally tall. His eyes were black pits, deep and endless, as if they were pulling. The very light from the world around him. "You thought you could outrun me, didn't you?" I tried to scream. I tried to fight, but the words caught in my throat, choked by the cold, suffocating air. His voice was everywhere, inside my skull, crawling under my skin. "Where do you think you're going, trucker?" he whispered, his voice sweet like honey, and yet it carried the sting of 1,000 thorns. I looked out the window. The highway wasn't there anymore. It was gone, replaced by an endless abyss of black, stretching out beyond the horizon. It was like I was falling into the void, and no matter how much I tried to steer, I was being pulled deeper. "I can't run," I whispered to myself, but the words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You never could," the demon replied, his voice a cold, malicious whisper. I slammed the brakes, but it was no use. The truck was sliding forward, picking up speed even as I tried to slow it down. The world outside the window turned into a blur of dark shapes, like the landscape itself was disintegrating. "You've been driving this road your whole life," he said, his voice soothing like a lullaby. "And now it's time to see where it ends." I felt it then. The weight of everything I'd done, the mistakes, the lies, the lives I'd broken along the way. Each one was a step I took down this endless road. And now this was the final stretch. My foot was still pressed against the brake, but it didn't matter. There was no stopping. The truck was no longer just a machine. It was a cage, and I was the prisoner. The road ahead, if you could even call it a road, opened up into a massive chasm. I could see the edges of it, dark and jagged, stretching far below me. I tried to turn, to swerve out of the way, but my body was locked in place. The demon stood tall now, his form towering over me like a shadow, his smile growing wider, impossibly wide, stretching across his face like some grotesque mask. "You're not getting away this time," he said, leaning down close to my ear. "The road is mine, it always has been." Everything went black. There was no crash, no scream, no explosion of metal, just silence. And then I opened my eyes. I was still in the truck, still driving, still on the road. But this time, everything felt different. The air was colder, the shadows longer. The world outside the window was no longer the same. The road stretched on forever, endless, unyielding, no stops, no exits. Just a dark, yawning void that swallowed the light. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was empty, but I could still feel him. His presence was there, like a shadow creeping over my shoulder. And then, in the silence, I heard this voice. It's done. I don't know how much time has passed since then. It could have been days, weeks, years, but I'm still driving, still stuck on this endless stretch of highway where the road never ends and the darkness never fades. I don't know if I'm still alive. I don't know if I ever was. All I know is that the road is still there, stretching on forever. And so, am I? And every now and then I hear that whisper. You can never escape. You've always been mine. The road has no end, and neither do I. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the words and the silence I lost track of where I was. The diner, the desert, the road, it all started to blend together. It was like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and no matter how hard I tried to wake up, the dream kept pulling me deeper. The man beside me, no, not a man, I knew that now. He was just a shadow, something worse than a ghost, a demon, pure and simple. His cold, mocking grin never wavered as I felt my legs buckle beneath me. I collapsed onto the diner's floor, gasping for air as the suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, squeezing the life out of me. The lights flickered, then dimmed, casting long shadows across the room, stretching like fingers across the walls. The air felt heavy, thick with something wrong, something ancient. The voice came again, like a whisper in the back of my skull, but now it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. You think you can escape? I could feel the darkness swirling around me, clawing at my insides, pulling me towards something awful. My mind screamed, trying to hold on to the last shreds of reality, but it was like trying to keep your grip on a rope that was already snapping. I've been with you since the start. The demon continued, his voice like gravel. I've watched you every step. The drugs, the violence, the pain, it's all part of the plan. You think you've outrun me, but you've only been driving in circles. Every road, every turn, it's always led back to me. I tried to move, to stand, but my limbs were like stone, my body completely frozen. All I could do was look up at him as he leaned in closer, his face getting closer, so close I could smell the rot on his breath. You're mine now, he said softly, almost tenderly. I've been following you, waiting for the moment you couldn't run anymore, and that moment was here. His smile grew wider, stretching impossibly far as the darkness around him seemed to fold in on itself. His hands reached out, long fingers, too long, and I could feel the coldness of his touch like ice sinking into my flesh. It was then that the world shattered. I don't know how long I was out. My mind was swimming, tangled in a fog, and I could barely make sense of what was real anymore. When I finally came to, I was lying in the cab of my rig, the sound of the engine humming beneath me. But something was off. The air was still thick and the world outside looked different. It was night again, no stars, no moon, just an endless void of blackness. The road stretched out ahead of me, but it wasn't the same road I'd been on before. It was darker, twisted. The highway signs were bent, like they were melting in the dark. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the grogginess from my head. That's when I noticed something else. My hands were shaking. Shit, I muttered, wiping my palms on my jeans. I glanced into the rearview mirror and froze. There, in the back of my truck, was the passenger. The same figure from before. The same damn demon. He was sitting quietly, his eyes locked on me, that grin still on his face. How long has it been? He asked, his voice calm like we were just having a casual conversation. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, as I turned to face him. What the hell do you want from me? I spat, my voice cracking with desperation. His smile widened and I could see the emptiness behind his eyes, the cold, unfeeling void. I want what's always been mine. I could feel my chest tightening, my heart pounding faster. It was like I could sense it in the air now, his presence suffocating, all-consuming. I didn't need him to say anything more. I knew what he was talking about. He was here to take me. You know what I want, he said, his voice almost tender. You've known all along. Every choice you made, every wrong turn, every life you ruined, it all led me here. The truck shuddered beneath me, and I slammed my foot on the brake, nearly skidding off the road. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't just give in. No, I growled, my hands gripping the wheel. I'm not going with you. The demon chuckled, low and guttural. You don't have a choice. I turned back to the road ahead, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. But I couldn't run anymore. I had nowhere to go. It was like the world itself had closed in around me, trapping me in his grasp. And that's when I realized I wasn't in control. I slammed the truck into gear, pushing the pedal to the floor, but the road just twisted and shifted before my eyes. The headlights flickered and the truck seemed to jerk in and out of reality. Everything around me blurred, distorted, as if the world itself was dissolving. I wasn't driving anymore. I was just a passenger. It was like being caught in a storm. The sky turned black, lightning flashing in the distance, thunder roaring in the background. The truck was spinning out of control now, its wheels screeching against the asphalt as I tried to steer it. But there was no steering anymore. The demon had taken over. I was trapped. The world outside the truck was fading, melting like paint dissolving under a rainstorm. The highway signs were gone. The horizon was just a black abyss. The stars were swallowed up by the void. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "Look at me, trucker," the demon said, his voice calm, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. I turned to face him one last time. His grin was even wider now, almost impossibly wide. His skin seemed to ripple, like the darkness was alive within him, shifting with every movement. "You know who I am," he whispered, his face inches from mine, now. "And I know who you are. You can't outrun me. You never could." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick, suffocating, like my lungs were filled with tar. I could feel the weight of the years, the mistakes, the pain, all of it pressing down on me. It wasn't just my body anymore, it was my soul. "You've been mine from the start," the demon said, his voice growing louder, more insistent. "And now you'll come with me." And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back on the road. At first, I thought it was a dream, just another twisted hallucination. But as the truck rumbled beneath me, I realized this was no dream. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was empty. The darkness had lifted. The road stretched out ahead, normal again. The stars were visible now, and the moon shone brightly in the sky. But something was wrong. I felt different, empty, like a piece of me was missing. I glanced down at my hands. They were pale, thin, almost lifeless. I looked out the window, but the road was still dark, the world still silent. The hum of the truck was the only sound, a constant low drone. Then, in the silence, I heard the voice again. It wasn't his voice anymore. It was mine, and it said, "It's done."